Hey everybody, welcome to Mammoth Interactive's YouTube channel. First of all, I want to thank you for watching this video. And remember that this channel doesn't do Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital courses down below. And every single dollar that we get from the products you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help out this channel and Mammoth Interactive is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Get thousands of hours and hundreds of courses for a low price down below. We have a monthly option and a yearly option. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the video.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our course, Learning Simple Augmented Reality from Scratch in the Unreal Engine 5. In this course, we're going to learn how to build out an augmented reality project from scratch in Unreal. We're going to be setting up our project, building out a level, building out some simple blueprints to perform augmented reality. In this case, the augmented reality is going to be to detect geometries in our world via a phone camera. So we're going to learn how to set up the augmented reality and also how to test that with a phone camera. So how we can set up our Unreal project and our phone to test out our project. Let's talk about what you will need to take this course. All right, you are going to need, first of all, an Epic Games account. This is completely free to create, and you need that in order to install the application Epic Games Launcher to your computer. And via the Epic Games Launcher, you can install a version of the Unreal Engine. All of these are completely free. We recommend installing Unreal Engine 5.0 Early Access because that is the version that we are using in this course, but you can use any version of Unreal Engine 5. As well, you're going to need a Windows computer because Unreal runs slowly even on M1 Macs with a Windows virtual machine. If you are going to be testing out your application on an iOS phone like an iPhone, then it's recommended to use a Mac. But for starting out the building of your project, it's recommended to use a Windows computer. This is highly recommended, and then only if you want to then later deploy your project for iOS, you can then use a Mac to build the project for iOS. But for actually building out the project, not packaging it for iOS, it's recommended to use a Windows computer. As well, you're going to need Android Studio 4.0. We're going to show you how you can install that later on in this course when we get there. The reason you need this is to launch an Unreal project on an Android device. So we are going to be showing you how to build out a project in Unreal and then testing it on an Android device because we need a device camera in order to actually render at the world around us and then render augmented reality on top of that real world. Android Studio 4.0 is required to install the Android SDK, NDK, and JDK for the Unreal Engine. And you have to make sure you're using the correct version of Android Studio for your version of Unreal. And for Unreal 5, that is Android Studio 4.0. You'll learn how to install it later on in this course. And this is only for deploying the project on an Android phone. For deploying the project on an iOS device, like an iPhone, then it's recommended to use a Mac computer to package the project for iOS. But you can still start off by building it on a Windows computer. You will also need a device to actually test the augmented reality project. You need an Android device with ARM version 64. An iOS device is not recommended without a Mac. So you do have to make sure your Android device is ARM version 64, nothing less. You can't use ARM version 32 or ARM version 7. That is too low of an Android device version, and Unreal 5 no longer supports that version of Android devices for testing. And we'll show you when we get there how you can check what version of ARM your phone actually is. We'll show you later on in this course. As well, all of the source files are provided at the end of each section. You just have to extract all the zip files and then open the project via the Epic Games Launcher. You don't want to open it directly via your folder because then that can cause it to not build properly. So the Epic Games Launcher is very useful for installing Unreal and also opening projects, and you can also download assets from the Unreal Marketplace and more. We're going to be using blueprints to write our app functionality. Blueprints are a visual scripting language that are an alternative to C++. In Unreal, you can either build projects and write their game functionality in blueprints or in C++. If you're working long-term in Unreal, then it's good to know both of them. But for beginners just starting out, blueprints are going to be a lot easier to build and debug. And blueprints still follow the same concepts of programming, like they still use loops and variables, functions, classes. So it's a great way to learn programming as a beginner. In terms of experience, it is recommended to have Unreal experience before taking this course, because we're not going to be breaking down every little thing about Unreal. So if you don't have any Unreal experience, it's highly recommended to watch our Unreal introductory course, introducing Unreal 5. But you can just jump in if you don't have experience. Perhaps if you come from a different game engine or a different software, you will be able to follow along with Unreal, but it will be harder if this is your first time ever opening Unreal. And that is this course introduction, what you will need to take this course. Join me coming up next. We'll talk about how to install Unreal, and then we will start building out our augmented reality project. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In the previous section, we built a new Unreal project, and in this section, we're going to implement augmented reality into the blank project from scratch. This will allow you to understand how augmented reality works from the ground up in Unreal. So join me back in our project, and we're going to begin by adjusting the settings and plugins for augmented reality. And note that I have increased the text size of my display, so that's why my display looks a little bit more smushed, but I still have all of my tools here on the right. I can still press play and choose my platforms. Okay, so I'm going to test out the game by pressing play, and we just have a regular blank Unreal level here with the floor. I'll press escape to exit the play mode. All right, next let's go into the settings tab, and I'm going to select here project settings. Then I am going to select from here my Android project settings. So I'll just scroll down until I get into platforms, and I'm going to select Android. Okay, here I need to configure the project for the Android platform because I'm going to be showing you how you can test out your project on an Android phone. You can also build the project for an iOS phone, but it's recommended to test out on Android. If you do have a Mac, it's a lot easier to test out for iOS, but if you just have a Windows computer, then it's harder to test out on an iOS phone. It's recommended if you're going to test on an iOS phone that you use a Mac for that. So we are going to be testing on Android because we're running Unreal on Windows. All right, here under Platforms, Android, we are going to first select to configure the project for the Android platform. So select this button, Configure Now. Okay, now our platform files are writable. Next, we're going to select an Android package name. Okay, here you can change this from com.yourcompany.project to instead something that is more unique to yourself. So for example, we'll do com.mammoth.interactive.project. And this project is going to be replaced with your project name. Okay, then you can scroll down here and look at all the other settings that are available. For example, if you want to enable for Google Play, then you also have to configure for the Google Play services. As well, for testing, note that there are a lot of conditions for testing. For example, you have to make sure that you have a phone that supports ARM64. All right, so if your phone does not support ARM64, you'll notice here you actually won't be able to test it on that phone. And we'll talk more about that when we get to testing out the project and talking about how to launch the project on a phone. Okay, next you can also set the minimum SDK version here, and as well the target SDK version. And don't set this lower to 19. Often you'll also find these adjusting by themselves during the build. We want at least an SDK of 21 for minimum. Next, let's set the orientation. Okay, so here, if you scroll down to orientation, you have sensor landscape selected. That is the one you want to choose. So make sure you do have sensor, could be sensor portrait or sensor landscape or just sensor itself. As long as it's one of the sensors, okay, you can either choose sensor portrait, sensor landscape, sensor, or full sensor, which means you can use any orientation. And that is going to allow us to more easily have a user interface that works smoother because we're working with augmented reality. So that's why we want sensor. This will use the type of orientation based on the device orientation sensor. Okay, now that we've set our orientation, let's go into our input settings. So I'm going to scroll up to here, the engine section, and select input. Here, we are going to set our default touch interface. All right, so this will allow you to actually touch your screen. Now for our project, we're not going to have any touching of the screen, so let's just go ahead and clear this. So just click on any default touch interface option already selected and hit clear to make it none. That way we won't be able to touch or interact with the screen. We'll just have a camera view, and that's not required. For other projects, you can enable a touch interface. Okay, there's this touch interface setup. So that way you can actually enable user input from the phone via touch. But in our case, we're not going to have any interaction via the user themselves, except they're just going to be able to move their camera around. But for other more complicated augmented reality projects, then yes, you could implement touch. As well, next, let's go into our plugins. So I'm going to close project settings and just make sure you close it on the left-hand side. If you click the close button on the top right-hand side, you're actually closing your whole project. Okay, so I'm going to close my project settings, and then I'm going to go back into settings in the top right-hand corner and select plugins this time. Okay, here I need to enable an augmented reality plugin. Okay, so whether that's for iOS or for Android, you have to enable an AR plugin. So Apple ARKit would be for iOS, but for our Android phones, it's going to be AR Core. Okay, so we need to here enable this plugin that supports Google's AR platform. There's also Google AR Core Services, which provides functionality in Google cross-platform AR Core services. But for testing on a phone, we only need this Google AR Core. So select here, enabled, to enable this plugin. All right, now for the plugin changes to take effect, you have to restart your Unreal Editor. So just go ahead and press Restart Now in the bottom right-hand corner. All right, and my editor has restarted after just a few seconds. So then I can type in Google AR Core again, and you'll see it's now enabled, which means we can close the plugins window. And we can also save all. All right, so those are the settings we needed. Now, there's also going to be more project settings that we'll work on later. We are going to later on go into Platforms Android SDK, and we're going to specify the Android SDK that we're using. I'll show you exactly how to set these up, because by default on your project, you won't actually have these filled in. These will be empty, but in my case, I have them set up because Unreal saved them from a previous project. So later on, we do have to also set up Android SDK, and I'll show you how we do that, because if we don't set up Android SDK, we can't actually run the project on an Android phone. All right, so we can close our project settings, and that's it for the setup for now. So join me in our next lecture where we're going to build a new empty level for augmented reality. Because yes, we do have a level right now, but it has some content and it has a camera and lights. But for augmented reality, we don't want to use this virtual world. We want to actually be able to grab the real world around us via the device's camera. So in the next lecture, we'll make a level specifically for that. Join me in the next lecture. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're going to build a new level or map for our game. Currently in levels, we have map 1, which is this default map. And this has a bunch of default objects that were created whenever we create a project in Unreal that is a blank project. Now, next up, we're going to create a new map or level that doesn't have any content, because instead of rendering a world as we have now, we want the world to be rendered using our phone camera. All right, so to make a new empty level, we can hit Control-N, or we can go to File and select New Level. And here you can see the keyboard shortcut. Okay, so I'm going to select New Level. Then from here, I'm going to select Empty Level, not Default. Okay, and there we go. Now we can see we have in our viewport just a black screen, and in our world outliner, we don't have any content in the level. Now let's save this level by hitting Control-S. And make sure you save it in your levels folder just to stay organized. We are going to call this our blank level. Then hit enter or save. All right, and there we go. Now we have our blank level. And this is the level that we are going to use in order to actually render our augmented reality scene. Okay, so now in our content browser, we have blank level. And we can also look in the world outliner, and we can see we have no content inside of this level. Next up, we are going to make our first blueprint a game mode blueprint. That way we can specify which pawn and which player controller we want to use for augmented reality. So instead of using the default player from our map 1, instead of using this level, we're going to set it up so that our main level is the blank level. So join me in our next lecture where we'll continue our project. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, we built out a new blank level, so that way we can use our phone's camera in order to generate the environment instead of having this virtual environment made. Next up, we're going to build our first blueprint. Okay, we are going to need a game mode blueprint, so that way we can specify what has to be the default pawn and what is going to be the default player controller, instead of using what is already set in our default settings whenever we create a new project. Instead, we're going to override those and create our own custom blueprints. All right, so let's go into our content browser. And I am going to create a new folder here. So I'm going to click add, or you can right click as well. And let's select new folder. And here I'm going to call this my blueprints folder to stay organized. Double click on that to enter it. Then let's create our first blueprint. Okay, so I'm going to select add here and select blueprint class. Okay, then I'm going to create a new game mode base. This is going to be our blueprint for our game mode. I'm going to call this our game mode and then hit enter. Okay, so here we go. We have now our game mode. We could also call this our custom game mode if you want to. So you can call this game mode, custom game mode, just to differentiate it from the others, or augmented reality game mode as well. Okay, now let's double click on that blueprint to open it. And I'm going to drag that window right beside our other windows. Then in the details tab, you can see different properties of this game mode. Most notably, the classes. Okay, so here we want to change the default pawn class to be our own custom pawn. And as well, the player controller class we want to set to be our own custom player controller. So let's go back to our content browser and let's create a couple more blueprints for those. All right, so I'm going to here select add and then blueprint class. And let's start by making a pawn. And I'm going to call this our AR pawn and hit enter. Okay, then if I go back into my custom game mode, I'm going to set my default pawn here. And I'm going to set it to my custom AR pawn that I just created. All right, then let's compile and save the blueprint. And let's also create a player controller for augmented reality. So I'm going to select add blueprint class. The type is going to be player controller. This is an actor responsible for controlling a pawn. And then I'm going to call this my AR player controller and hit enter. Okay, then back in my custom game mode, I'm going to set my player controller class to the AR player controller. Okay, so this way, I'm now going to be using my custom pawn and my custom player controller in a new game mode instead of using the defaults. Make sure you save everything with File, Save All, or Control-Shift-S. Now, we've set the player controller class and the default pawn class, but how do we actually specify that this game mode is the one that we want the game to use instead of its default? Well, for that, we are going to go into our Settings tab in the top left-hand corner. Here, we're then going to go into our project settings. In our project settings, we need to find our modes. So search up modes here and you'll be taken to maps and modes, but you'll only be shown the default modes here because we searched for modes and not maps. Okay, and here we are going to change our default game mode. Instead of using game mode base, which is the default used whenever you create a blank Unreal project, instead I'm going to use our custom game mode that we just created. Okay, so make sure you set that, otherwise your game mode won't actually be recognized. Now in the drop down here, selected game mode, this refers to that default game mode that we selected, and you have to make sure that you have the default pawn class and the player controller class correctly set. Make sure these are no longer just the default, but that they're actually your custom AR pawn and AR pawn player controller, which are those two blueprints that we just created together. Okay, as well, I want to change my default map, so I'm going to go into my maps. All right, here we go, and we need to change our editor startup map and the game default map to our blank level. Okay, so I'm going to select your editor startup map, and I'm going to select blank level. As same for game default map, I'm going to select blank level. If we leave it as the default ones, then we actually will be using those other maps instead of our blank level. And we don't want that. We want to make sure we're using the blank level because that will allow us to use our phone's camera to render the world. All right, so make sure you set both modes and maps. And once you've done all that, we are good with our game mode blueprint. Next up, we are going to fill in some content into our pawn blueprint. Okay, because the pawn is what's going to actually contain our augmented reality functionality. So in our next lecture, we're going to implement the event graph of this AR pawn, and we're going to actually have it do some augmented reality. For example, this could be detecting planes, this could be putting an object into the world, this could be registering touch if you wanted to include that. This could be whatever augmented reality you want to implement in your project. In our case, we're going to be detecting geometries, and we're going to be doing that in this pawn blueprint. So join me in our next lecture where we will build out our blueprint. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, we set up our blueprints, our game mode, pawn, and player controller. And in this lecture, we're going to build out our blueprint for the pawn. This will be the blueprint that does the augmented reality functionality. In our case, that is going to be to detect geometries inside of the world. And the world will be whatever is being rendered by the phone camera or whatever device you're using. All right, let's open up our pawn blueprint here. And I'm going to go into the components. You can see all we have by default is just a default scene root. But I'm going to add a camera component to this blueprint. So I'll press add. And here I want to search for a camera. Okay, and I'm going to select that. There we go. Now we have a camera in the viewport. Let's compile and save all of this. All right, next let's open up the event graph. Here we're going to get started building out our functionality. I'm going to just delete event actor begin overlap for now. We won't need that one to get started. And we will need event begin play because this node is going to run whenever the game starts. So let me just drag this around. Let me first compile and save, and then I can drag around. There we go. So off of begin play, the first thing we want to do is we want to immediately start an augmented reality session as soon as the application or the game begins. So I'm going to drag off here a new executable node, and I'm going to call the function start AR session. Okay, this is under the section for augmented reality. Hit enter, and now we have here that function. You can see we're being prompted to create a new session configuration object. This describes the tracking method to use, what kind of geometry to detect in the world, etc. If you search for the asset, currently we have none. That's because a session config, this is a session configuration and it is a data class. So we have to create our own data asset that is an augmented reality session configuration. Okay, so to do that, let's compile and save everything, and then let's go back into our blueprints folder in our content browser. Here we are going to create a new data asset. All right, so I'm going to just select add, and then I want to go into miscellaneous, and here I am going to choose AR, or not AR, but rather data asset. There we go, and mine's just flickering because I'm zoomed in quite a bit. But here we go, we have pick data asset class. Okay, and here I want to search for AR session config. There it is. So select that one. And notice it's a data asset, and then press select. Okay, so now we have here our data asset created. Let's just call this our d_session config. This is just the naming convention. Typically you put a d_ in front of the session configuration. Okay, then let's go back into the blueprint for our augmented reality pawn. And now we can actually fill in this argument. We can click on select asset, and we can choose that data asset that we just created. All right, then I'm going to now be able to look around the world and scan the world to see if there is a geometry. And if there is, then we can show it on the phone or the device. All right, so for that, we're going to go into our other node, which is the event tick. Okay, so I'm just going to drag that a little bit up. Event tick, this is the node that is going to run every frame of the game. So that's quite often. So we're going to continuously be detecting geometries in the world every frame of the game. That is quite a lot of detection. You could definitely reduce the amount of detection you're doing. You don't have to detect every tick. But for our simple project, we can just detect every tick. All right, so off of this node, I'm going to drag an executable action, and I'm going to select here. In this case, I'm going to look for get all geometries. Under here, augmented reality, we're calling this function get all AR geometries. So we're searching for all the geometries in the world. The world being whatever the device's camera is showing, whatever that device's camera is detecting. All right, then I'm going to make a for each loop that's going to loop through all of the geometries found, because I want to go through all the geometries and show them on the phone. So I'm going to drag this executable node off, and here I'm going to search for each loop. Right, there we go, there it is, and select that. And the array is whatever we found in those geometries. So we're going to grab the return value of the function getAllARGeometries and pass it to the array of the for each loop. So that means we are looping through all of those geometries and performing some action for each geometry. Notice that I had to connect it via the executable node, and I had to pass in the parameter. If you leave out one of these two, then the for each loop won't perform accurately. Okay, so what do we want to happen at each of the geometries? For each of the geometries found, we can drag off this array element to perform some action. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the tracked geometry. So I'll drag off this node and I'm going to search for draw tracked geometry. There we go. It's under debug for augmented reality. There we go. So we can draw whatever geometry was tracked, which means it will just outline it. So you'll be looking through your device's camera and you'll see whatever the camera is picking up, whatever the camera is rendering, and then on top of that, it will also draw whatever geometry it's detected. And those will be as just two-dimensional shapes. All right, so there we go. We've called this function debug draw tracked geometry. Make sure you also pass in here the loop body. Okay, so we want to plug in from the loop body to this debug draw tracked geometry. All right, and we can also expand the draw tracked geometry to see some finer details. For example, you can change the color of the tracked geometry, as well as the outline thickness and how long you want it to persist for on the screen. Okay, so we can just keep the persistence very small just because we are running this every tick already. Okay, and this is the basic setup for our pawn. We're going to first begin a new augmented reality session, and then for every frame of the game, we're going to be searching for all of the geometries that the augmented reality session detected. And for each of those geometries that it detects around you, it's going to draw them. So it's just going to outline whatever geometries it finds in your camera. All right, now we can compile and save all of this. And next up, you can just set up your project for your phone, and you can already test this out. So you can't test it out without a phone. If you just go to the play right now, you'll see that you'll be attempting to start an AR session, but there is no AR plugin configured. So what we have to do is we have to actually install Android Studio and set up your Android phone for debugging, and then add the Android SDK to Unreal, as well as the NDK and Java. And then once you have your project set up for testing on your Android phone, then you can actually run the project. And you'll be able to see the app will run on your phone and it will access your camera. And then you can see your world through your camera, of course. But then on top of that, the pawn blueprint will also be drawing on top of any geometries it finds. It will outline them. Okay, so join me. Coming up next, I'm going to show you how you can set up your Android phone for testing. You can also test on iOS, but for that, it is recommended to have a Mac because it's slightly more complicated to set up your phone and your testing on iOS. As well, you can use an Unreal 5 turnkey to test out your applications really quickly on Android and also on desktop. As of Unreal 5 Early Access, there is beta support for turnkey on Android phones. So if you do have turnkey set up already, then feel free to use that. It makes the setup for testing on phones faster, for Android at least. As of Unreal 5 Early Access, there's no iOS support for that, but there will be in the future. All right, so you can also test on desktop if you do have a webcam. You just have to make sure that you have that set up as your device that you're running it on. Okay, so you would go into Play here and you would select whatever desktop you have. The device has to have a camera. So most augmented reality applications are run on the phone, so I'm going to show you how you can set it up with a phone. That being an Android phone, I'm going to show you how you can set it up from scratch just by installing Android Studio and setting up your phone and adding the SDK to Unreal. If you do have Turnkey, then it does make the process a lot faster, but not everyone has Turnkey set up. So if you don't have Turnkey set up, I'm going to show you how to do it from scratch. So join me in our next section. We're going to learn how to set up an Android phone for testing out an Unreal project. If you already know how to set up your projects for testing on your phone, then you can just go ahead and immediately test out this project already. But if you've never tested out a project on an Android phone before, then I will walk you through all the steps in the next section. So join me over there.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this course. If you want to watch the rest of the course, the link is down below. Not only will you get the access to this course, but you'll get access to a lot of other courses in a huge bundle, and it's on sale today. So buy before the sale ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.